Well, welcome to the Unstoppable Freedom Podcast. I'm Jimmy Page. Hey, welcome back for part 2 in a special series on educational freedom. Education, because every single kid in America has to go to school, is one of the most important and influential roots of the American system. When Ronald Reagan said freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction, he understood the power of education. It has the power to produce kids that love America or those who hate it. It has the power to produce victims or overcomers, kids that compete or those who want to be coddled, kids that are self-reliant and confident, prepared to be successful and engaged citizens, or those completely dependent on government for survival. It even has the power to produce social justice warriors for any cause that the state or the government deems important in that moment. So it could be climate change. It could be racial inequities. It could be gender ideology. It could be anything that is the issue of the day. That's the power of education. Education is the root of freedom. And that's why what our kids are being taught matters so much. Well, if you were there last week, in last week's podcast, I talked about the war on kids. And specifically, I exposed what was really going on in the schools and what you can do about it. It's not just, hey, all these things are wrong. But in addition to that, there are very specific steps that we can take as parents and concerned citizens that can really make a difference. Well, this week, on the heels of the war on kids, I'm going to talk about the war on parents. I'm going to spell out how to decide what the best option is for you, for your kids, for your family, and how to decide if your family is capable of surviving a public school education. And in fact, in many ways, a private school education. Listen, they have our kids for 16,000 hours of education from the time they enter kindergarten to the time they graduate high school. So you have to evaluate if you're prepared to overcome what they are likely to be exposed to. You know, I remember, my dad was a superintendent of schools in Rochester, New York, many, many years ago. And I can tell you that most of the things that we're facing today, he never had to face. There was not this ideological war for the innocence of our kids. There were not inappropriate things being communicated between adults and kids, at least not in a systematic way like they are today. So we're facing different times and parents are waking up. I mean, I got to tell you, I hear from them all the time. In fact, I've got neighbors and friends who are constantly in this fight. So let's get right into it. First of all, as we start, I want to say this about teachers because, number one, I've got family members who are teachers who are doing an exceptional job, who have not bought into the woke ideology, who are standing in the gap, who see their job as a calling, as a mission to bring truth into our schools, to help our kids strive for excellence and fulfill their potential and become everything that they're made to be. And they're also standing in the gap against some of this garbage ideology, which is so prevalent. So I want to say, I recognize there are tens of thousands of teachers who are doing a heroic job to teach truth, to protect our kids, to keep them from this nonsense and harmful indoctrination, and we applaud them. And at the same time, unfortunately, many teachers, especially the Christian teachers, they're exhausted. And many, many Christian teachers have left the profession or have gone into private or sectarian schools because of the woke Marxist ideology and the failure of administrations to create an environment that keeps kids and teachers safe in schools. They simply are not safe in schools anymore. Part of that has to do with the DEI curriculum, the diversity, equity, and inclusion curriculum, which really makes it impossible to discipline kids depending upon their color of their skin, depending upon their gender, because we have this victim ideology, this victim mindset, and we have social justice warriors in our schools who are creating an environment, truthfully, that's unsafe. And teachers have been complaining about this and getting virtually no response from administration for a long time. Well, last week, last week we talked about a couple of things that we can all agree on. And those two things are really simple. Number one, if you remember, no one loves our kids more than we do as parents, and no one knows them better than we do. That is a universal truth. Are there outliers? Are there rough family circumstances where that may not be true? Sure. But that's the far exception rather than the rule. And number two, we believe we are not co-parenting our kids with teachers. We're not co-parenting our kids with the state. We're not co-parenting our kids with administrators, counselors, teachers, any of it. Our rights and responsibilities for our kids do not stop when they step on the campus. In fact, we as parents, we are the primary educators of our children, period. There's no one that stands in that position other than the parents. We trust teachers and schools to be an extension of our values and to do something very specific to prepare our kids to be great citizens, to be great men and women, to fulfill their potential, to strive for excellence. But we as parents, we have a sacred responsibility and we have a duty to raise and educate our kids in a manner that honors God, values the family, instills faith, character, virtue, and ultimately equips and prepares them to be productive and honorable citizens of the United States of America. And by the way, we're not a democracy. I just want to insert that right here because sometimes this is where people say, that's right, we're a democracy and we want our kids to know we're a democracy. Wrong answer. We are not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic where our rights come from God, not government. Government's limited role is to protect those rights and to maintain freedom for all of our citizens. So let's get right into it. Those are two things we believe. Well, let's talk a little bit about the war on parents, and then we're going to end up with some very practical ways that you can protect your kids and make decisions about what you're going to do for the next school year. What are we going to do with our kids? Are we going to send them back or are we going to find alternatives? So let's talk about the war on parents. The war on parents is heating up all across the country. But the good news is this: parents are not cooperating with the state. They are not co-parenting. We are, however, directly involved in what they get taught, what they do or do not get exposed to. We have a right to have a say in that, and we have a duty to protect our kids. Your rights and responsibilities for your kids don't stop when your kid steps on a school campus. Your rights continue. This came to light, if you remember, this war on parents and what was really going on in our schools came to light on a national stage in Loudoun County schools in Virginia. I used to live in Virginia. I went to school in Virginia at Virginia Tech, the Virginia Tech University. Anyway, it came to a head at Loudoun County schools in Virginia. They became a battleground for parental rights and parental authority and responsibility for the kids. And interestingly enough, that battle is still raging in Loudoun County and frankly, all across Virginia, all the way to Fairfax County, all across this country, in virtually every state across the country, from California to New York. And in this particular case, of course, in Loudoun County, it was a matter of the physical safety of kids. And if you remember the story, a trans female, which means a biological young man, was allowed to use the female bathroom and assaulted a young lady. The school district covered it up. They denied it. They transferred this trans female biological young man to another school where he allegedly reoffended, did the same thing to another female student. And many leftist politicians don't think that parents should be involved in the education of their children in any way. So they looked at parents' outcry in this situation as parents overstepping the bounds, which is absolutely ludicrous. But more than that, many politicians don't think that parents should be involved in the education of their kids in any way. In fact, two of the largest teachers unions, the National Education Association, the NEA, and the American Federation of Teachers, AFT, they are directly opposed to parental involvement. There have been many videos that have surfaced from their conferences where they have spoken passionately and openly about this. Actually, in many ways, ridiculing parents, that somehow we're not qualified to weigh in on the education of our kids because we don't have degrees or letters behind our name. And most of us have degrees and letters behind our name. It may just not be in education. These two organizations even sent letters to the FBI asking for them to intervene against parents. And our current administration even labeled parents who show up at school board meetings as domestic terrorists. I guess that means I'm one of them because I show up at school board meetings. But you need to hear this. As parents, government officials, teachers union officials, school boards, administrators, they truly believe that your kids are their property. Your kids belong to the state, especially when they step on school grounds. But remember, no one loves our kids like we do. No one knows our kids like we do. And no one else is responsible for the primary education of our kids. This is a communist ideology, this idea that the state owns our kids. In fact, China's kids belong to the state. They are a communist nation. They believe that those kids belong to the state. Parents have essentially no say in the raising of those kids, especially when it comes to education. That's China. The same was true in Nazi Germany. No one knows this, but the same thing was true in Nazi Germany. There was a war against parents. There was a change where kids became the property of the state. And then, of course, they were manipulated. They were indoctrinated. They were turned into activists. And now that ideology has taken over all levels of our educational system. This idea that kids belong to the school, which of course is not true. Do you see why education is at the root, the very core of our freedom? Because what they're taught about America, about our founding, about our history, what they're taught about our values and our laws and all of our rights that come from God and all of our protections under the Constitution and Bill of Rights, what they're taught about those things is going to determine whether this generation is the generation that gives up essential liberties. I don't believe that's going to happen because there's too many of us that care deeply about this. There are millions of parents around the country that are not willing to let that happen. But what our kids are being taught is going to have a direct effect on future generations. This is also true. School districts are even strategizing on how to keep things from parents off the record. And some states have passed laws that make that legal. Colorado is one of those states. California, of course, is another one. This is why millions of parents are either fighting the system to make changes, flipping school board seats, showing up at board meetings, getting objectionable materials removed, making sure that critical race theory or diversity, equity, inclusion, and all the rest of that nonsense is not part of their school district, or they're making the decision to remove their kids and finding alternatives. But either way, parents are engaged. Well, here's what we believe, and we believe this deeply. It's our duty as parents to protect our kids' mind, body, and spirit, to preserve their innocence, and to prepare them to succeed in life. Well, here's the deal. The bottom line is this. Your kids are not safe at school. Not necessarily in a physical sense, although that could be argued. But from an ideological indoctrination sense, they are absolutely not safe in schools. And you have to come to grips with that. And number two is you have a decision to make as parents that will alter your kids' future depending upon where you send them to school. Well, everyone asks this. So we come to this point where we understand what's happening to our kids in school from last week. We understand that parents are now in opposition to the school system and the curriculum and the indoctrination. We understand that there's a war against parents, that many people in leadership don't want parents to be involved in their education at all. So everyone asks this question. This is the natural question that comes. Okay, so what can we do about it? What can we do about it? What can we do about it? And last week you heard two very specific recommendations. One was to get involved and fight. And you remember we've had the founder of Moms for Liberty, Tiffany Justice, on podcast 19. Again, I recommend you listen to podcast number 19 with Tiffany Justice. I recommend that you join or start a Moms for Liberty group. And they're not just moms, they're also dads and grandparents and a whole bunch of other people involved. But join and support a Moms for Liberty group in your area. And they can be found at momsforliberty.org. And the second thing we told you was, hey, if you've had a negative experience where your kids are experiencing a lot of what we talked about, or you are being discriminated against as a parent, you can connect with Nikki Neely with Parents Defending Education. Their website is defendinged.com, and they were on podcast number 13. So if you want to listen to that, that's another great way to tell your story and expose what's going on. And then the other thing you can do is get immersed in the classroom, is find other parents who are like-minded, like-valued, who want to make sure that kids are protected, and set up a regular schedule to be present at the school, in the classrooms, to observe what's being taught and to basically act as someone who prevents some of this nonsense, some of these secret conversations from happening. That takes a lot of effort. That takes a lot of work, but that is option number 2. And then the other one is this. Your other option is, as parents, is to remove your kids. If you can't remove the garbage, if you can't protect them from it, another option is to remove your kids and find another option. Charter schools, homeschooling, private schools, Christian schools. You know, I often tell people, hey, listen, once you discover that the building is on fire, you're less likely to send your kids in. You're more likely to get your kids out. So if you have interactions with your school administrators, school board members, teachers, and you discover that the environment that your kids are in, you would classify that as the building is on fire, then it's your obligation to figure out how to get them out. So let's start here. How do I make the decision? How do I make the decision whether or not my kids can survive a public school education? How do we make that decision? Once we discover some of the things that are being taught, these are some of the questions to ask yourselves, to wrestle with yourselves as you make your decision. And this is primarily for people who have strong faith and strong values, primarily for Christians and people of faith who want to make sure that their values are being supported in school. My litmus test for whether to send my child or a child to a school that teaches comprehensive sex ed, that has woven critical race theory, or as I like to say, racism theory, into the curriculum. It's very subtle, but it's very deliberate. Who has strong diversity, equity, and inclusion, which means that they value equity over equality. They're basically dumbing down all of the expectations. If they have that, and if they have age-inappropriate books in their library, if that's going on at your school, here are the questions that you need to wrestle with as a family. Okay, very simple. And by the way, we have a resource for this on our website under Educational Freedom. You'll see resources for that. There are take action resources with all of the things I'm going to share now, but there are 5 essential questions that you need to wrestle with to decide what you're going to do with your kids for school. Number 1, this is the question. Do we have the family values, the structure, and the community support from like-minded individuals and families? And do we have the time and tools necessary to counteract all of the false information, the indoctrination, the lies, and the false narratives that our kids are going to be exposed to? They come from all angles. Do we have the family structure and support and time and tools and resources necessary to counteract all of these messages that your kids are going to get? That's number 1. Number 2, do we fully know what our kids are potentially going to be exposed to in the classroom? What they're going to be exposed in the libraries, conversations they could be having from other adults, from counselors. And are we confident that we will know how to respond and handle it without creating confusion or harm? This is a big one. You know, we know that they're probably going to be exposed to values and ideas and ideologies that are opposed to everything that we believe and stand for. The question is, are we confident that we are going to know how to respond and handle it and have those conversations with our kids? That's number 2. Number 3 is, do we have a faith community that actively and intentionally reinforces our values, including our kids' identity, including the biblical family, including the value for life and justice and equality, and all of the other social and moral issues of the day. In other words, are we in our faith community, in our Bible studies, at church, in our community groups, are we having conversations that reinforce our values with our kids? Are we actively engaging in bringing the truth into those things so that when they experience the lies, when they experience things that don't quite match what mom and dad believe, do we have a faith community that is actively supporting those values or not? Okay, that's question number 3. Question number 4 is this. Do we have a community of other families at the school that know what's happening and are actively engaged in protecting their kids? This is a big one. If you're one of very few parents in that school that are engaged or that care about it or that are aware of what's happening in the school, it's going to be very hard for you to counteract the messaging from that school and the potential vulnerability of your kids. If you have many other families that are of like values and like minds and have the time and energy to engage in that school to protect their kids, if you can form a network of parents in that school to be present, to be engaged, to bring the same level of concern with teachers and administrators, you have a fighting chance of creating an environment that will work for your kids. That's number 4. Number 5, the question is, can we overcome 16,000 hours of anti-faith, anti-freedom, and anti-family indoctrination? And, by the way, turning our kids into activists for whatever topic it is of the day, whether it's climate change or global warming or, green energy, insert the thing. Can we overcome 16,000 hours of indoctrination that is fully in conflict with our own value system? Can we do it? And the question you have to answer there is, how much time and energy are we going to and are we able to spend on this topic over the dinner table, on the way to and from practices, on the way to and from activities like dance and other things? Are we going to dedicate time to counteract these messages? Can we overcome it? Those are the 5 questions that I'm encouraging parents to wrestle with together. Wrestle over these topics and determine, hey, do we think we can win on these 5 questions or are we going to lose? And then that will inform your decision about whether to keep your kids in the current school environment they're in. So here's the next level. So if you go through those 5 questions and you decide, hey, we think we've got the support and the structure and the faith community and like-minded neighbors who have kids in our school, and we think we've got the time and energy and intentionality to overcome the indoctrination. We're going to keep our kids in public school. If that's true, if that's the decision you make, there are 5 questions that you must ask every teacher, counselor, administrator, and board member before you send them to school. Okay? These 5 questions are going to address the things that your kids are likely to be exposed to or encounter in school. And you want to know, you want to get them on record as saying how these things will be handled. Okay. 5 questions. You've made the decision to keep your kids in the school. You think you can weather the storm and protect your kids and prepare them to be successful, productive citizens. These are 5 questions you have to put on the table with teachers, counselors, and administrators before you send your kids back. Okay, here they are. Number 1. Is it acceptable for you or any other adult at school to have secret conversations with my child that will be kept from me as a parent? There's part of me that can't believe I'm actually asking this question, because the answer has to be no, right? It's never acceptable for an adult, especially an adult in a position of authority or power, to have a secret conversation with your child that's going to be kept from you as their parent. Honestly, I can't even get my head around the fact that we have to ask this question, but this is a question you have to ask. Will any adult have secret conversations with my kid that will be kept from me? Is that okay with you as a teacher, a counselor in this school district? Is it practice? Number 2, does this school have a trans closet where kids can change clothes and change identities from one gender to another without parental knowledge? Again, another question that I cannot believe I have to ask. But you as a parent, you need to ask this, and you need to get real answers. Do they have gender affirming care in their school? Now, gender affirming care is a misnomer, right? Of course, but do they have opportunities for kids to change their clothes and identities in school once they've gotten there without parental knowledge? That's number 2. Number 3, will any adult in this school ever have a conversation about gender pronouns or gender fluidity with students? Will any adult ever have a conversation with a minor, with your child, about gender pronouns or gender fluidity with students? This is an issue that will be in opposition to your belief system, to your values, especially if you're a person of faith. I can guarantee you that this question will be answered with a yes. They will have conversations about gender pronouns and gender fluidity with kids as young as 3, 4, 5 years old. So this is going to be problematic, right? Okay, that's question number 3. Question number 4 is, will any adult in this school ever divide or separate children in any way based upon the color of their skin? Or will they use terms like victims and oppressors? Will they separate kids into those groups by color? That people of color are victims and white kids are oppressors? Will they divide or separate children? Will they shame kids? Will they make kids feel guilty for an external characteristic like the color of their skin? Is that acceptable? That's the 4th question. Again, something you never thought you'd have to ask, but you do. And number 5, will any biological male be allowed to use the bathroom or locker room for biological females? Is that possible? If you have a son or a daughter, if you have a daughter who goes into the girls' bathroom or the female locker room, is it possible that a biological male will be allowed to use that bathroom or allowed to use that locker room? That's your 5th question. Then the last question you're going to ask, and it kind of sums up all of this, is, can you assure me that my child will not be exposed to these conversations, that they will not participate, that they will not be in a position where they're vulnerable? Can you assure me that none of these things will happen to my child? This, of course, they will not be able to answer affirmatively, because that's part of the educational experience. It's actually part of the curriculum. It's part of the system. You need to go on record as parents to say that it's unacceptable for any of these 5 things to happen with my child. I do not agree with these ideologies, and I don't want my child exposed to conversations, secret conversations, or actions with adults. And I don't want them put in compromising situation with kids of another gender. These are important conversations, right? And these are 2 very important resources that you can download off of our website that will help you, number 1, have conversations with your spouse about, and with your kids, about what to do, what decision to make for their education for next year. And then it gives you an opportunity to know exactly what to ask teachers and counselors and administrators and board members to get the answers that you need in writing, and to then let them know that you're not okay with any of these circumstances happening. It's important that you go on record, and I would put it in writing and I would sign it. We also have a resource that says that that we will not go along with these things if they are happening in our school. We do not consent to these things. We've got these resources on our website at unstoppablepreedomalliance.com or ufafreedom.com. That's the website. If you go to Take Action Resources or you go to Educational Freedom, you will find these resources there. You can download those resources and then take action. Go through these questions. Make decisions. Download the We Do Not Consent document that lets your educators know that you don't consent to any of these activities with your kids. It's really important that you feel empowered, that you have resources necessary to take the action to protect your kids so that they are free from all this nonsense and that they're prepared to be successful in life. So there you go. The war on kids is raging. Parents are engaging all across the country. The war against parents is also raging, but boy, I think in many ways that just makes people want to do more. And if you're like me, there's that stubborn streak in you that you know what's right and wrong. You know the difference. And when somebody tells you that you can't do something, you're going to jump into the fray and prove them wrong. And that's what we're hoping, to empower you with the tools you need, with exposing you to information that you need to know so that you can make the best decisions for your kids, for your families, for the future. Thanks again. Hey, resources are on the website. Download those resources and take action today. God bless you.